We're talking Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba. What to expect in 2024 on RotoViz Radio.
What's up, RotoViz?
Welcome into the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Curtis Patrick. I'm joined by Dave Caban, and we're picking up where we left off. We're looking at the 2023 rookie standouts and trying to see what 2024 might have in store. We're using some of the RotoViz tools, notably the RotoViz Screener and the NFL Stat Explorer to add some context. I mean, this has all kinds of applications, Dave. It's got never too early best ball implications. Hard to believe we've already got 2024 best ball drafts going on. It's got dynasty implications for startup drafts. We're going to be doing those very soon. You can play never too early best ball and RotoViz Triflex Dynasty over at myffpc.com. Great sponsor of the RotoViz Radio platform and this podcast in general. Dave, I'm pretty excited for these three wide receivers tonight. Last week we talked about some of the even bigger names. These are three guys that it's a little bit more variation, a little bit more wider range of outcomes, but we could see any one of these three, I think, make a leap to the elite tier in 2024. And it's going to be pretty cool to see what the historical sims tell us so that we can make an educated guess on which guy it's going to be.
Sure, but I have to push back a little bit here already on what you've said because
oh no,
my guy Jordan Addison, I feel like he came out, he delivered, and I'm not certain. We're gonna have to go back and look and make sense of this. That he needs to be mentioned, like he is somehow beneath the three players that we talked about prior.
Yeah, I mean that's probably fair. We're kind of having the discussion before the discussion. What if Kirk Cousins doesn't go down? What if Justin Jefferson doesn't get injured? There's all kinds of stuff, right? And that's where we fill in with our fantasy brains and figure it out. But
okay,
we're also going to use some data and some history to inform the process here. So if you missed it last week, be sure to go to YouTube, check out that episode. As we got started in this series, or you can go to RotoViz Radio, look at our previous podcast and just dial that one up in the menu. But again, in this episode, we're talking Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba. If you're watching live on YouTube, leave us some comments. Maybe take a guess. Who do you think is going to show up in some of these queries that we run through the screener? Or do you just have something you want to say about one of these three players? Good comments will make it onto the show. All right, Dave, who do you want to start with?
All right, let's start with Jordan Addison. I already have him pulled up in the Stat Explorer as well as the screener. And actually, I will pop things over here to the Stat Explorer quickly, Curtis. First thing that's interesting here, right? If you just look across the season for Addison, he actually finishes 6th in total touchdowns among wide receivers. It was 23rd in overall PPR, 32 in PPR per game. Interestingly, though, had 2 spike weeks here that you can see with wide receiver 1 weeks. And I think I will say now that perhaps, you are right in the way that you framed things. The 3 players we talked about earlier. I wanted to make a case for Addison. Obviously, like you mentioned, we do have to think about some of the implication, but wide receiver 3 or worse in 65% of weeks. Of course, if you look through the first 8 or so weeks, let's just do that. If we look at weeks 1 through 8 here, which you can do in the Player Stat Explorer, you'll see he was a little bit stronger there with 38% of weeks at wide receiver 2, 12% of weeks at wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a solid rookie season. We saw the flashes. I mean, all in all, 6 wide receiver 2 or better finishes from game to game perspective. And I mean, there's just a lot that didn't go right for this Vikings offense. I mean, I think he played with 3 different quarterbacks. He played a material portion of the season without Justin Jefferson. There were some changes going on at running back. And then as the team fell out of contention, a little bit later in the season, everything kind of just changed. So there were definitely enough flashes that we can see, hey, like with a totally healthy offense, provided there's competent quarterback play, the Vikings pass catching core, I mean, it could be one of the most exciting ones in the entire NFL. You think about how Addison complements with Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. That's a pretty formidable group, and they get to play so many games indoors. So let's flip over to the RotoViz screener, because now what we can do is, instead of just zooming in on Addison, we're gonna see, based off of some key fantasy metrics and rates here, who are the closest historical rookie season comps for Jordan Addison, and what might that tell us about what to expect in 2024. So while Dave's dialing that up, we can dial up all kinds of things in the RotoViz screener. We can put, year in the NFL. Obviously, we're going to drag that toggle over to 1, because it's just, we want to compare to players who were in their first year. We could do it by age. We could make sure that we only compared Addison with age 21 rookies, because he didn't turn 22 until after the season was totally complete, Dave. We're not going to do that for this exercise right now, but we could do that if we wanted to do another layer of analysis. We can toggle on, first, second, third, fourth, fifth round draft picks and exclude things from the data set. So we're going to play with that in particular to make sure that we're comparing him not only to all rookies, but then also just to those rookies that had the early draft capital, because I think especially for like dynasty valuation, especially and role preservation year over year, I think that carries some weight. But Dave, why don't you let us know what metrics we're going to use just for this first kind of catch-all filter?
Sure. So as you said, we're going to look at year 1 in the NFL, leave draft picks wide open. Then the stats that we're going to call up, just very simple: receptions, targets, yards, touchdowns, yards per reception. I run that through in our database. Come down here to the similarity search tab in the screener, pull up Jordan Addison 2023, giving equal weighting to those parameters that we called up. We return the rookie season comps for Addison as Chase Claypool, Calvin Ridley, Larry Fitzgerald, Sterling Shepard, Keenan Allen, T. Higgins, DK Metcalf, Jaden Reed sneaks in there, which is interesting. Marquez Colston, Roy Williams, Rashee Rice, also interesting. Terry McLaurin, and I'll stop there.
Yeah,
overall, that's pretty good group, man.
That is a good group. I mean, that group's full of wide receiver 2 seasons and quite a few wide receiver 1 seasons. I mean, Larry Fitzgerald, Calvin Ridley, Keenan Allen, DK Metcalf, T. Higgins on that borderline there. I mean, yeah, this is a pretty impressive group. It's actually a stronger group than I would have anticipated getting back for Addison. Now, yeah, well, I mean, I don't think there's really much to say. I mean, I think that's a great cohort. It certainly speaks to the quality of production that he had in his first year. And I mean, you could easily see that, that he's destined for great things. If we just compare him to, are you going to do just a first round draft picks right now?
Yep.
Okay. So we're going to compare him to other first round draft picks. And if we want to get real, if we want to go real crazy, we could just do the 21-year-old rookies. And then we get a really nice.
Do you really? All right, let's do that then. Let's have a little fun here.
Okay.
So we'll punch that in. So first rounders that were 21, and I honestly don't know exactly how large of a sample that is even to begin with.
And I just want to clarify, this is not draft age 21. This is NFL season of record age 21. So he's only being compared to players who were 21 on December 31st of their first NFL season.
Yep. So when we do that, we still see some similar names. So we get Fitzgerald, Higgins, Harvin, CeeDee Lamb, Drake London, Sammy Watkins, Jeremy Maclin, Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, JSN, which is interesting, Akeem Nicks, Jerry Jeudy, DJ Moore, and DeAndre Hopkins.
I like this list a lot. I like this list is even slightly better. What I like about it is you see players like Percy Harvin and Jeremy Maclin, who are both a little bit more slight, like Jordan Addison. I mean, returning Chase Claypool as the top historical rookie season comp for Jordan Addison. I mean, that's similar draft capital and similar stats, but I mean, they're just totally different players, totally different physiques.
Which we can control for if we were so interested. You can control for weight in this as well.
Yeah, we could do that. But I mean, I think we see some body type lookalikes now in this list, and even some of the larger receivers aren't necessarily. It's not just a stacked group. I mean, sure, Mike Evans is a mountain, and Larry Fitzgerald is too. But CeeDee Lamb is still pretty slight despite his size. So I mean, I like this. I mean, there's there's tons to be optimistic about here. And when I think about the context of these other receivers, what's really interesting too is when Larry Fitzgerald came into the league, he didn't have to be the number one right away. When T. Higgins came into the league, he wasn't the number one right away. When Jeremy Maclin came in, he wasn't the number one right away. Now, some of these guys were, but I think that's also helpful to see because some of these guys were still productive really early, even though they weren't the number one right away. The thing that caps Addison just a little bit is, I mean, man, Jefferson and Hawkinson are both still really young themselves. It's not like he's coming in as a young pup with like Stephon Diggs there at age 30 that's phasing out. I mean, this is a young, exciting nucleus that's going to play together for a while. So it might be death by 1,000 paper cuts defending the Vikings, but Addison is going to definitely get his moving forward. I mean, this makes me, I'm really glad that we looked at Addison tonight because I'm going to get a little bit more favorable with my dynasty ranking. His year was a little rockier than some of those other guys, but I mean, this is really an impressive historical sim group.
Yeah, and I think the thing that stands out here for me, and I actually had noticed that as well, is a lot of players on this list that early on shared the field with, in many cases, a really good wide receiver in front of them. Yeah. I don't know, even as much as I liked Addison, that I ever expected him to really be what you might consider like a superstar, an elite type of wide receiver for fantasy purposes. The thing that I just felt very confident about was that you're going to be able to have him having a long career in which he's contributing, getting into maybe that wide receiver 2 type of range. And I think what we're seeing here certainly speaks to that longevity and that profile where he's certainly going to be viable for a while to come. So overall, good comp group. I'm still excited about Addison moving into next season. And I think the other possibility that we have here is some of the context of his season might get lost for drafters as we get further and further away from this season, which should keep his value in a spot that it's palatable for us.
What this really reminds me of is kind of the Philadelphia Eagles situation with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, with Addison kind of comparing to Devontae there. Okay, let's transition here. Let's go over to Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers going to get an extended look here because the Ravens are still playing in the playoffs, and I think that's going to do a lot for just the general public and awareness of his abilities, because we're watching all these island games for the Ravens, and he's really impressive in space, and I think his rapport continues to grow with Lamar Jackson. Flowers is a different case study, and was a different case study coming out, older than Addison coming out, drafted right in that same area of the first round though. Addison was the 23rd pick of the first round, and Flowers was the 22nd pick, went one pick before, but an older prospect from a smaller school than Addison, etc. Just not quite the hype, but I mean, man, he's had a pretty impressive first year. So why don't you take us through the NFL Stat Explorer on how Flowers performed before we get into the screener work?
Yeah, so the things that I think are worth mentioning here, he was number 19 in total touchdowns, finishes number 28 in overall PPR, number 29 in PPR per game, 33 in expected points per game, and actually 26 in fantasy points over expectation per game. Now, it's an interesting split here in the year for him. He was a wide receiver 1 4 times. That was 25% of his games. Wide receiver 2 just 19% of the time. But 3 of his biggest games of the year came from week 12 on, right? So you see him have actually his 4 highest scoring games of the year, Curtis, after week 12, as you mentioned. People getting to see him now in the playoffs, continuing to grow with Lamar. Maybe he makes another couple of, impactful plays across the end of the year. And you can see why there should be excitement about Flowers as we move into the 2024 season. So I'm going to dial up some things here. Thoughts on Flowers? While
you're dialing that up, I mean, I think one thing that's going to play into Zay Flowers redraft ADP, his best ball ADP, and his dynasty value moving forward, there is something in the customer service industry That's referred to as peak and end effect. And so customers tend to remember the peak, whether that's a positive or a negative peak of experience, and then also the end of the experience. And Zay Flowers peaked at the end of the season, so he played his best most recently. So I mean that is really important. And I think even in comparison to Addison, I mean, if the Ravens go to the Super Bowl and we get to see, 2 more island games with Flowers, and he puts up 5 for 90 in one game and 470 and a touchdown in the other game. I mean, even though he probably projects realistically pretty similar to Addison in terms of skills and then opportunity, because the Vikings will probably throw more than the Ravens will, I still think Flowers has a chance to kind of usurp that value there. So that's going to be interesting. But let's see what the screener has to say about his historical rookie season comps.
Sure. So we run Flowers through. We put things wide open, just looking for year one wide receivers. Couple of really interesting names here, Curtis. We get CD Lamb in here as his closest comp, followed by Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jarvis Landry, Drake London, T. Higgins, Rashee Rice, Cooper Kupp, Devonta Smith, Dwayne Bowe, Justin Blackmon, Brandon Ayuk, Eddie Royal, Deontay Johnson, and Garrett Wilson.
Okay, yeah, that's a little bit of a more wide open list, but I'm encouraged that we see a couple older guys in there. This is, with Addison, you almost get that freebie year because when you produce as a 21-year-old, it's just like an extra checkbox there. But for Flowers, it sometimes can be concerning. I mean, it's a little bit of a downgrade to be an age 22 rookie versus an age 21. And we have some other rookies in here that were 22. There's not really any big whiffs here per se. I mean, I guess you could say that the jury's still out on Rashee Rice, although indicators are pointing up. Justin Blackmon is a really complex case study. Who looked good, and then had a that was a complex situation. So let's do this. Let's actually only compare him to age 22 and above rookies. Let's eliminate the 21-year-olds and see what happens here, and then also reduce it to round one only.
Okay. So if we do that, and we look for Flowers here, what we're going to find here, Curtis, is we do get some change, and this is actually kind of interesting. So you get Devonta Smith moving up to his closest comp, followed by Brandon Ayuk, Dwayne Bowe, Justin Blackmon, Kendall Wright, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, Andre Johnson, Chris Olave, Donnie Avery, Peter Warwick, Michael Clayton, AJ Green, Calvin Ridley. And I'm going to keep going because I want to say this name, Sylvester Morris.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah, focusing on the top here. Yeah, I mean, I quite like it. Devonta Smith, Brandon Ayuk, Dwayne Bowe. I mean, Zay Flowers, he's not really a style comp to any of those guys at all, or Justin Blackmon. I think you can start seeing some comparisons with Kendall Wright and maybe even Jalen Waddle as more similar players amongst this group. There's actually some size, some height in this group overall. Garrett Wilson being a little bit smaller, probably thought of as maybe a more complete player coming into the NFL, but we still haven't really gotten a chance to see his peak yet either. So this is actually pretty encouraging for Flowers too. He probably really saved himself by peaking there at the end of the season. If he hadn't given us those extra wide receiver 1 games to boost up his overall, raw scoring and PPR output, this might have been an even more hodgepodge of a list. But I mean, what are we really looking at? Just Donnie Avery, maybe as the only actual full whiff amongst like the top 12 or so.
Yeah, I forget, like Kendall Wright.
Yeah,
let me take a quick look.
Stuff on Wright. I'll get you some stuff on Wright while you react to the list, because he did have a couple decent seasons, but it wasn't a long and storied career, but he produced.
Yeah, so let's see. So his PPR per game rank actually In his second and third seasons, he finished 27th and 32nd in those years. So they're actually, was 2 years of viability for him there. And then he was normally hovering somewhere between 50 to 70. But yeah, I mean, overall, I actually think this is a pretty encouraging list when we cut at things from the perspective which we are at here. It does seem like it's hard to find a player that really matches up in the way that you perceive him to be playing and used on the field. And when you factor in, the biophysical profile, but I think it's a pretty interesting group here. The final thing that I will say though is, he has that ridiculous run, maybe not quite ridiculous, but very impressive run at the end of the year. I have not done an analysis on this in a while, but I will caution people about trying to read too much into extrapolating the back half of the year into the next. It does not tend to work out like that.
Yeah, or really even it's just at the end of the day, we've got 17 games. That's not a very large sample size. Now,
right.
For a wide receiver, it is probably like 1/6 of their valuable dynasty career. So, you can't just say, hey, give me 34 games and I'll reevaluate. Now, with not to veer too far off course here, because it's not a Kendall Wright episode, but there is, when you start to get into some of the, I guess, outliers on the low end, wanting to understand maybe why it didn't work out for them. So Kendall Wright in his second year, he really actually exploded. He led the Titans. It was 2013 rather. He led the Titans with 139 targets. He had 94 receptions, 1,079 yards, and just 2 touchdowns. So, was probably a regression candidate in the season that would come. And that season, he played with Ryan Fitzpatrick and Jake Locker as his quarterback. So, it was like mid-career Fitzy, not YOLO Fitzy, wearing the change for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But 3/4 of that season was with Jake Locker. And then you start going forward and you can see why it never materialized beyond that point for him. He still had 93 targets in his third season in 2014, but the Titans had Charlie Whitehurst and Zach Mettenberger at quarterback.
Oh my gosh.
And then in 2015, that was Marcus Mariota's rookie season. Delaney Walker by that time had broken out, and the team drafted Dorial Green-Beckham as a perimeter receiver. And so the team started to take on a little bit of a different look. And then by 2016, now we're finding out that, Mariota could play a little bit at that point, but they're handing the ball to Derrick Henry and DeMarco Murray, over 400 times. The Titans kind of became the version of the Titans that we know them to be in that season. So Wright, it just didn't, it didn't go right for Wright, but they're not super different. They're built the same, working in space. I really don't even mind it. Like, I don't view that as a negative name coming up in his historical comp. So for Zay Flowers, I think the question is just really going to be, with a healthy Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely still going, can Lamar Jackson keep it up, and can Flowers earn enough target market share to be more than, a wide receiver 2 with occasional wide receiver 1 upside? Like, can he get that consistency, or is he going to be the Me Too guy in the offense?
Yeah, I still am encouraged by Flowers, but I do think that, you raise some fair questions there. Especially when we consider the 3 players that we talked about last week. And we're going to talk about JSN now and try to make a decision about, what things could look like for him moving forward. So unless you have anything more to say on Flowers, I think we'll transition.
No, I liked getting to talk about Kendall Wright, though.
Yeah. Well, what I enjoyed about that was they got to show off how neat it is, though, when you can go back in the Stat Explorer and you pull up the charts over their career and just get to see, what percentage of their career were they a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, how many times were they inactive, all of that stuff that pulls up nicely in the charts, always fun. All right. So moving along here, we got JSN.
Yep.
One of the first things I think stands out, Curtis, is he was very effective in converting air yards into yards. Actually, number 6 in Racer, finishes at 59 in PPR per game, just 136 in fantasy points over expectation per game. Now, I think it's worth noting that in air yards per target, he was 87th, but we see a good conversion rate given that he actually put up 5.8 yards after the catch per reception, which ranked 11th among wide receivers. He failed to ever record a wide receiver 1 week and was a wide receiver 2 just 18% of the time. Of course, Curtis, and I'll let you speak to this, there is certainly some context in which we need to wrap this.
Yeah. So first of all, Smith-Njigba was drafted to, I'm not arguably, I think definitely the most crowded pass catching situation of the three guys that we've talked about tonight, with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett already there. The Seahawks were not necessarily, a heavy passing volume offense, but then, right as the season was starting, Smith-Njigba, I think actually right before the season, he had an injury, had a hand injury. And so, he played through it, he was able to get back and play, but we really saw his role grow after the bye week. And so I think one thing that, we're not going to do that in the screener, but if we were to ignore those first 4 games and look from week 6 on, the PPR per game looks a little bit healthier and, the situation just changes a little bit. Now, that being said, just eyes on the player. We've got some work here to do with Smith-Njigba. I'm not sure the Seahawks know exactly how to use him, and I think we need that wide receiver room to clear out a little bit for him to take a step forward. He probably is as talented as the other 2 guys that are there, but things are going to change here a little bit. We've got a coaching change in Seattle. We're going to have an offensive coordinator change. Shane Waldron now going over to the Bears, I believe. So wholesale change in Seattle. Lockett, I think, is entering the final year of his deal. Probably, I'm not sure that they would be able to cut him this year. It's been a minute since I've looked at that contract, but I think he'll be there for 1 more year, probably. So there's context there. And now the other thing that I'll mention about JSN is he actually is not yet even 22 years old, Dave. So he also finished his rookie season at age 21. So that is something that is helpful for us. These younger rookies, it's impressive when they can be drafted in the first round based off of their relative, youth and a prospect pool. It also gives us a little bit more patience, maybe with those players. So we'll want to be sure to age sort on this player in the RotoViz Screener as well.
Unrelated note, but this is very cool. We have comments coming in, and that comments can now come in via Twitter, which is exciting.
Oh yeah, I love to see the integration. Quentin Fensky mentions JSN is going to be very good when Lockett is gone. I really think he leads the Hawks in receptions. Hey, you and me both, Quentin. I would love to see. I think he and DK, they would be a frustrating duo to defend. Lockett is still. The thing is Lockett's still a pretty good player. So it's not that we want anyone to fall off for JSN to be able to break out. JSN needs to be able to break out on his own accord just because he's that talented. So thanks for the comments there, Quentin. And Josh is celebrating that he made it in time for JSN here into the live chat. So, okay, what does the screener tell us about JSN's historical rookie season comps?
Okay, so more of a mixed bag than we've seen yet. You got Darnell Mooney, Kendall Wright. So maybe it was worthwhile that we spent all that time on him. Laviska Shenault, Deontay Johnson, Tyreek Hill, Jamison Crowder, Timothy Wright, Hunter Renfrow, Jeremy Maclin, Stephon Diggs, Jordan Shipley, Drake London, Brandon Ayuk, Brandon Cooks.
Yeah, some overlap. We're getting a little bit of overlap on each of these guys. It's probably related a little bit. Well, I don't know if we're pulling in. No, we're not pulling in the draft cap.
No, we're wide open.
We're wide open.
So I think.
What do you think about that?
So this is what I think about that. I think that some of the reason that you're getting some overlap in players is with the way players or the way wide receivers are being utilized now. You're not seeing, unless they're putting up the gaudy numbers of some of those players that we saw earlier, like even a decent first year, your numbers are kind of depressed. So you're matching to guys that are from older seasons where, even somebody like Diggs, back in 2015 only saw like 52 receptions in that year, or guys like, Tim Wright with the lower numbers in receptions. I think that's some of what's driving it.
The difference is there though, and we're going to find this when we sort. I mean, especially with Diggs and Wright. I mean, those were lower draft picks. I mean, Diggs was
Right.
a day 3 guy, so we're going to keep some of these lower. Mooney was a lower end guy as well, but we're going to keep some of these lower producers from the earlier draft capital in the sample here. Still, it is curious though when you leave it wide open, and I think this is why. You've got to kind of risk rate everything in Dynasty. I mean, these guys maintain their value after their rookie season. We know that with these high draft picks. But if you were, if JSN was your rookie wide receiver 1 coming in, and which was the case for many players in Dynasty pundits alike, I mean, you do need to adjust at this point now, right? I mean, we can't ignore this full season. If you're propping him up against Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison, I'm not sure why you would dig in on keeping him above those guys now, given what we saw in the first season. So this is a more curious group. I wonder what it's going to look like when we throw out the day 2 and 3 draft picks and adjust for age 21.
Sure. And if I wasn't making my point clear earlier, what I was trying to get at was with offenses being more spread out, you might have more of an opportunity here to match with guys back when there was a little bit less passing in the league and offenses weren't passing quite as much. Not sure if that came through, but all right, we're going age 21, first round draft picks. If we do this, I forgot to toggle it off of Justin Jefferson. I was like, oh, wow, this is making quite a difference here. JSN's followed by Jeremy Maclin, Brandon Cooks, Drake London, Percy Harvin, Elijah Moore, DJ Moore, DeAndre Hopkins, Kenny Britt, CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, Corin Robinson, Larry Fitzgerald, Jerry Jeudy. I think one of the interesting things here, Curtis, is that did change it, but you see a couple of names here, some guys that I think we were always waiting to do more with it or more with their potential than they ended up doing, which you would start to worry could be the case for JSN. And when you keep in mind the fact that the way we're filtering this down to players that were 21 and drafted in the first round, inherently you should see a lot of hits. So it's almost interesting that there are some names that you might call into concern. Now, Drake London, right, doesn't look like he's realized his potential. Well, you could blame that on the situation, but at the end of the day, you never saw things materialize for him in the way that I think people would have hoped when he was coming in. And you could say, well, you can talk about the situation that JSN is in, but, some players are just prisoners of circumstance. Elijah Moore, I don't think that would really encourage you. Kenny Britt was another name. It had that 1 year people were always hoping he'd put it together, and he didn't. Corin Robinson, I really don't have much of a memory on. So I'm kind of curious what you think of this set here.
Yeah, you might be too young to remember Corin Robinson. He was an early draft pick, also a Seahawk. He played in the early 2000s. Yep. I think he might have been on the first fantasy football team I ever drafted. He was a year 2 breakout guy. He went for 78, 12, 40, and 5 in his second season in Seattle. That's a big season for Seattle wide receiver for sure.
Yep.
Tip of the cap to Corin Robinson. Not sure the last time his name's been mentioned on a fantasy podcast. He is a very young, age 43 now at this point.
Wow. Okay.
Tip of the cap to Corin Robinson there. So I think with JSN, there are a couple other players who were really highly thought of prospects that still haven't quite figured it out. And I like seeing these names because it is a reminder that as much as we believe in talent, sometimes circumstances affect a player's fantasy outlook even more than their talent. You get in the wrong scheme, get married to the wrong quarterback, can't emerge from an offense that spreads the love, etc. There's a couple of different things. So the Elijah Moore and the Jerry Jeudy names popping up in here, I think are reminders of, those are still names that are new enough that people remember what they were as prospects. And it's like, you haven't totally given up on them, but it's like, I don't know. I mean, they're good enough to be on NFL teams and, they're probably still starters, but are they really going to ascend? I mean, it's going to be a mid-career breakout for either one of those players at this point, but there's still plenty to be excited about here with some of the other names in the list. So Quentin Finsky was fact checking for us as we were doing some of the episode here. He did, agree with our points about the depth chart, but he mentions that the Seahawks would have over $7 million in cap savings if they release Lockett prior to June 1st. I don't have time to check that live on the air, but I assume Quentin looked it up as we were talking. So if that's the case, we'll just have to see what the new coaching regime wants to do. If they're trying to compete right away, I'm not sure that they make that move. But if they're trying to, rebuild on the fly, that's certainly an attractive cut, which would clear the runway for JSN to consolidate some of that additional target share. So, there's reason for optimism, but at the same time, we can't just cherry pick, the names that we like from the sample. And this, of the three guys that we looked at, this is the most concerning sample. There's about 30% of these top 10 guys. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's certainly the takeaway here. Overall though, now Curtis, and there are still a couple more names that we could even get to in a future episode. I think that you have to rule that this rookie class of wide receivers really collectively had a very solid first year.
Oh, no doubt.
I'm just really excited to see where this goes, especially given the fact that, as we talked about earlier, we get to see Flowers and Rice perhaps even, improve their stock over the weekend, which I'm really looking forward to this slate of games on the weekend. I think that Kansas City-Baltimore game is going to be so fun to watch.
I think the divisional round and the championship round are my two favorite weeks of football every year. It's just great because you can actually watch all those island games. They matter so much. Just everything is on the line. The teams are playing great. Nobody bad really gets through there at that point. You can argue the whole body of work, but nobody's playing bad that has reached these rounds at that point. And there's so many fantasy football implications because of how many eyes are on these games. So they're fun DFS weekends. If you like to play pick'em games, you want to go over to Underdog Fantasy. You can use promo code RotoViz. You never played over there before. We'll give you a match up to $100 on your first deposit. Promo code RotoViz at underdogfantasy.com. But you've got to get your eyes on these games. And we've done a roundup on 6 rookie wide receivers at this point. I'd like to hit a couple of the running backs later this week, maybe a couple quarterbacks. I don't know if we're quite ready for that. I'd like to see some of these coaching changes made maybe before we talk the quarterbacks, because you want to talk about context with the wide receivers. Some of these young quarterbacks, I think you can argue that it's even more important. So let's see what happens with the coordinators and the coaches around the league. And there's just plenty to talk about, Dave. We've got dynasty startups that we need to start planning for. And I know we're giving some discussion and some thought to what is our rookie content going to look like here in the next couple of weeks with the prospect class. We got the Senior Bowl coming up very soon. There's just so much going on, man. It's a really fun time of the calendar.
Yep. It never ends. And the content for this week is just beginning. If you like that transition right there, we will be back later in the week, continuing to break down some more of these rookie seasons and placing them into a historical context. Thank you for listening to the RotoViz Fantasy Football Show. Send us questions at rvffshow@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at Dave Caban FF and at CPatrickNFL. Leave us a voicemail at 978-615-9214 and make sure to rate, review, and subscribe.